So good evening and welcome. I'm Martha Tedeschi, the director of the Harvard Art Museums, and I'm delighted to see all of you here with us tonight, and also to offer a special welcome to the artist, Arlene Shechet, who you'll hear from in a moment, and to the German Friends of the Busch-Reisinger Museum, who are with us here from Germany for this special event. And would you all raise your hands, our German friends? A round of applause. They are the supporters of this very important museum, of the constellation of three, the FOG, our Asian Art Museum, and the Busch-Reisinger, our Busch-Reisinger friends, are stalwarts, and they all are in Germany, but follow what we're doing carefully, and every once in a while, like today, they come to check on how we're doing. So, as is our practice before we start our program, I want to offer a land acknowledgement. Harvard University is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past and present, and honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. Thank you. We are delighted to welcome celebrated sculptor Arlene Shechet as our esteemed guest for tonight's Leventritt lecture. The artist's exhibitions and awards are too numerous to mention right now, because I know you're here to hear from her, not from me. But I do want to tell you that Arlene Shechet is likely familiar to many of you, not least of all due to the wonderful mid-career retrospective All at Once at the ICA Boston in 2015. How many of you had a chance to see that exhibition? Great. I see a lot of, Arlene, you probably saw it, didn't you? I see a lot of hands in the audience. Her work is represented in major museum collections such as the Met, the Hirshhorn, the ICA Boston, and the Los Angeles County Museum, and the Harvard Art Museums, as we were able to acquire her work Casserole for our exhibition in 2018, and you'll hear more about that quite soon. She joins us here in Cambridge from Kingston, New York, where she has her main studio. And she has already had a great session with students yesterday, which is an important part of the Leventritt lecture program. It's a public lecture, but it's also a chance for the artists to meet with Harvard students on campus. The installation, Disrupt the View, Arlene Shechet at the Harvard Art Museums, opened on July 2nd. In it, Shechet presents her recent work, alongside historical German, Japanese, and Chinese porcelain objects from our own collections here at Harvard. It will be on view in our permanent collection gallery on level 1 off the Busch-Reisinger galleries for a 3-year period. So I hope you will have the chance to revisit it multiple times over time, noticing new and playful and telling juxtapositions with every visit. This project came about during the pandemic lockdown, so our staff was in isolation, even from each other, as well as from our collections for the most part. So I want to take a special moment to recognize the many members of our museum team who helped to realize the artist's vision. These include the curatorial department, collections management, communications, design, editorial, facilities, security, the Strauss Center for Conservation and Technical Studies, and visitor services. Please join me in thanking them for their contributions to this exciting collaboration with the artist. Thank you. The installation and related programming are supported by the Charles Kuhn Endowment Fund in the Busch-Reisinger Museum. Support for the event tonight is also provided, as I said, by the M. Victor Leventritt Fund, which was established through the generosity of the wife, children, and friends of the late M. Victor Leventritt, who was in the class a Harvard class of 1935. The purpose of this fund is to present outstanding scholars of the history and theory of art to the Harvard and Greater Boston communities. Modern and contemporary art programs at the Harvard Art Museums are also made possible by the generous support of the Emily Rao Pulitzer and Joseph Pulitzer Jr. Fund for Modern and Contemporary Art. And now, with those thanks duly recorded, it is my great pleasure to introduce Arlene Shechet and our Daimler curator of the Busch-Reisinger Museum, Lynette Roth, who spearheaded this project. Please join me in welcoming them both to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, welcome everyone. And thank you, Martha, for that kind introduction. And I just want to echo Martha's thanks to our entire staff at the Harvard Art Museums, and also to Arlene, of course, and to Arlene's incredible team, because it really did take a lot of Zoom calls and a lot of SketchUp mock-ups and all different ways for us to work together in ways that we actually don't like to work. We like to work with objects and together. And so it really was a testament also to, Arlene, to your commitment to the Busch-Reisinger Museum, to the Harvard Art Museums, that you really stuck with us through a pandemic exhibition planning process.
We stuck with each other. It helped that we knew each other a little from before.
Right, and that's actually so. I just wanted to say, this has actually been, beyond even before the pandemic, a collaboration with Arlene that's been really long in the making, at least in my mind, because the Busch-Reisinger Museum has an incredible collection of 18th century porcelain, primarily from the Meissen manufactory, which was the first European manufactory of porcelain, founded in 1710. And I'm actually a specialist for the art of the 20th and 21st century. So needless to say, although my collection included this extensive 18th century porcelain collection, I really, let's just say, I didn't really know how to get into it. And as an art historian who's thought a lot about the relationship between art and politics, and really what art can do in order to affect a social change, I was a bit puzzled primarily by many figures of the working class that were in our holdings that were made and created for lavish aristocratic celebrations in the 18th century. And as they're typically shown in museum contexts, for example, our coppersmith here from the Busch-Reisinger collection was shown in our second level silver cabinet gallery, and there is porcelain still on view on level 2 in our 18th century galleries that you can see. But I thought, okay, how can we kind of disrupt the view, and I knew exactly who I should ask, because Arlene, you and I had met. Martha mentioned the ICA exhibition, and at the time we invited you to come to our Art Studies Center, which was relatively new at the time, and do an art studies seminar, which as you can see was sold out in like 5 seconds. Everybody was very interested to hear Arlene speak. And what surprised me at the time was actually I thought you would select works of porcelain for us to talk about, but actually you ended up saying you wanted to focus on something else.
Yeah. Well, we did talk about porcelain.
We did talk about porcelain.
We did talk about porcelain, but I am interested in how a material that's been sequestered within museums, but also within art history, can play with other things. And I have a particular interest in German art between the wars. And I know that Lynette has great knowledge of that. So I said, I think if we pull some of those drawings out, we're gonna find a kind of lightness and darkness that overlaps with the attitude of some of these porcelain figures. And so we did.
We did, and it was actually then I think in some ways a foreshadowing of this working together, because then, of course, when we had our gallery, which is right off of our expressionist and interwar galleries of German art here at the museums, I knew that Arlene was approaching it not just from the perspective of putting porcelain in a new context, but also putting our broader collections in new relationships with our sculpture collections more broadly. And the fact that actually already in your ICA exhibition all at once were porcelain figures from the busch-reisinger Museum collection meant that you were already familiar with our holdings before we sort of even got started on this project.
Yeah, when I did the ICA show, and I think even when I did the RISD Museum show, I started to examine what was in the collections of all neighboring museums, and so what we could borrow, or at least what I could look at in order to understand better the subject matter.
So in some ways, this is a teaser for, we're going to get into some of Arlene's installations over really the last decade of your engagement with Meissen. But I thought maybe let's start at the beginning of your engagement with porcelain, and that was literally in Meissen in Germany. And I was hoping you could just tell us a little bit about what brought you there and what you found.
Yeah, so I was invited in a very open-ended invitation by Peter Nagy, who is a multifaceted figure in the art world, being a dealer, an artist, and also a well-respected curatorial force. And somebody had approached him, and he had a gallery at the time, not just in India, where he lives, but in Berlin. And somebody in Berlin had approached him asking if there was an artist who might be interested in working at the Meissen porcelain factory without having to, and this is important, without having to make something that they would produce as a product. Because there are many such programs where you're invited as an artist, but end up needing to create something that is producible. And I didn't want to do that, because I didn't even know what I wanted to do. And I had never worked in porcelain, but I thought if I'm going to ever work in porcelain, I want to go to ground zero of what that means, which is definitely the place in 1710 where it all started, and where the porcelain itself is so beautiful, just with nothing happening. It's just exquisite material, because porcelain is not the same all over. And many of you know that, but it is not like a product. Every factory, in China, it's different from Japan and Korea. Every porcelain is different, and every place that makes porcelain. So on the left, this is the 16th century town of Meissen, where I lived. I had an apartment right near the church, which is one of the sites that was the original factory. And then this was my walk into the factory building, which is a classic, slightly brutalist, but I loved it, industrial architecture of the early 20th century.
I love this image of you walking down the steep hill every day into the factory.
You should think about me walking home late at night through completely empty streets of this town. So I actually riffed on that experience in this slide. On the right, I took a picture of that view of the factory, and I tried to use the same glaze as this 18th century piece on the left, but to do, instead of Bavarian wonderful Bavarian mountains, just the Meissen factory. And so this is, a factory, very exciting for me. Making multiples is what they do. So they have been using the same molds since the 18th century to make multiples of various things. They don't use everything, whatever they decided their product line is any particular year. So it changes, but this is what, it's not surprising that this is what the factory looks like. But for me, I had long fantasies as a child of working in factories, which my husband jokes with me, he's like, "Are you done yet?" But where you really understood the means of production, really understood how things are made, and I feel like that impulse to understand how things are made was the tip-off that I was going to be a sculptor. Like it or not, yeah.
And where then process, not just process as a sculptor, but also production. I mean, these were the kinds of imagery where, I had actually visited the Meissen manufactory as a tourist. You can kind of take a tour and go through and learn how porcelain is made. But these were not the scenes that I saw of the Meissen manufactory. And when started talking to you, Arlene, about it and actually starting to think about this idea of porcelain as something that is a multiple, unlimited, still, same molds are being used today to produce, literally the same forms, and yet the handmade quality and the artistry and all of the aspects of it that you were bringing out in your work. That's where, again, sort of my way in was to start thinking about it in terms of labor. And I know these were interests of yours,
very
experiencing the factory and how things worked there.
Yeah, the idea of luxury goods rubbing up against industrial processes.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about those processes, but also, how porcelain is made, because it's so key to really appreciating where you ended up taking the medium.
Yeah. Well, what I realize now in explaining it that most people don't know that it begins as a liquid. It doesn't. The porcelain itself does not begin as a liquid. It begins as powders, chopped down or dug up, kaolin, like various powders.
I've learned now kaolin, feldspar, and quartz.
Yes.
If I learned one thing from my curatorial fellow Gabi Saleh, it is those three elements make porcelain.
But in different kaolin from different regions will make different porcelain. So British porcelain is very different from German porcelain because the mines are different. So yes, three major elements, but don't forget, people didn't know that before the 18th century. In Germany, or in Europe, they only knew it in the East, where it had been China, Japan, it had been in production for hundreds and hundreds of years. So anyway, liquid, they add water, it's a liquid, and every day in my studio, somebody would come and put his hand in just like that to feel if it was correct. And that material is called slip. The slip is then poured into plaster molds, and the plaster molds with these bindings held together with various bindings are the negative of the shape that people are trying to make in the factory. And here, this is the pretty version of the archive.
It's a beautiful.
Of the mold archives. Thousands of molds. No, by the time I was there at the end of 2 years, I was in buildings that, flies were all over everything. It's the DNA of the factory. It's the DNA of Meissen. It's their most precious legacy, and it's all over the place. They have, there was a big flood. I can't remember the date, but plaster can handle the water, so it actually survived, whereas many other things did not survive.
And that's what was so exciting to hear about your time there, because you had access to, I mean, again, it was a very competitive market. It still is. Secrets are kept very close. And so the fact that you had really free reign, at which I know you worked very hard for over time, but to not only explore these spaces, but really to use these historic molds to make your own work.
Yeah, so when I went, what do we have next? So this is, after a period of time, the slip is released from the mold, and that's when, and each mold is timed to a certain moment, and that's when the object can come out. I think here we are, but I'll explain what I ended up doing. So the first few weeks of being around, I was just trying to digest what it meant to be at Meissen, what it meant to be around porcelain, and what I realized was the thing that I loved was the production. The thing that I loved was the means of production, which were the molds. So the industrial forms I loved much more than the finished forms that they were trying to make. I knew I would play with that, but I was fascinated by the molds. So if we go back one there, so I basically took their molds that were made in plaster. I made my own plaster molds of their plaster molds. Again, my husband says nobody understands this, but my own plaster molds, and I cast those industrial plaster molds into porcelain, and I riffed off of the classic painted patterns in order to bring it back to this Meissen vocabulary. So the slide before, you saw my assistant making the mold of the mold, like figuring out how to make it. There it is on the right. That's the original. And then the next one is what I produced, which to me, I was just in heaven. It looked like the perfect covered jar. That, of course, it had nothing to do with what that mold was really for. Nothing. It was some tiny little not interesting object as far as I was concerned. But this little detail here is also me painting an onion. That blue and white pattern is called the onion pattern in America, but it's a misnomer because as I said, everything that the Europeans learned, they learned from Asia, and really those cultures were thinking about persimmons or pomegranates, which they didn't have in Germany, so they just assumed it was an onion. So I was celebrating the onion. So every time somebody would say onion pattern, I just laughed. So I use that.
And I think, here also, you had mentioned before, maybe it's an opportunity to talk about the insignia at Meissen as well. So Meissen porcelain, most of what we have in the installation is, if it's not Chinese or Japanese, because we wanted to point back to the fact that porcelain had been around since the Tang Dynasty, and the Europeans were really trying to figure out the formula, but that at Meissen, this cross sword insignia is basically how they both identify their product and also make sure that no one else is trying to pass off their product. And they were very particular about that with you as well. Yeah, they have people at the manufactory who only sign.
And after I was there for a week, they said, okay, time to sign. And I was like, time to sign? I often do not even sign my artworks because they're archived. But the signature, I understood why the signature was important because of this whole history of theft related to the formula. And there is a wonderful book that I think you got that's in the bookstore.
Janet Gleason's, now I'm blanking. Arcanum.
Yeah, the Arcanum.
Really, I mean, it reads like a detective. I mean, it is, and it's all the history of Meissen. Butker locked in a tower, and so it's definitely a worthwhile read.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile read, and there's still a vibe of that.
And you read that before you went to Meissen?
I read it just as I was about to leave, so I had a sense of place. So this is more, again, of the molds. Like that would be the mold up there on the left with yellow, and then my playing around, having cast that mold into porcelain, and that's it before, on the right, before it's fired. And you can see I use the numbers. I love the molds that were very used. I cast in every chip, every drip, any relationship to use, but everything was numbered starting in the 18th century. And so this piece you might recognize is in the show upstairs. This piece this is us making the casserole, and this was the biggest mold that they had ever done. Because all of my pieces were, because I was doing a mold of a mold, my pieces were way larger than their pieces. And so this was a big challenge, but the craftsmen there are so devoted to solving problems, and most of the time, and so clever and have been trained so much, but most of the time they have no problems to solve because have been doing the same thing over and over again. So when I came and I said, let's solve this problem, they actually really got behind me. And the first, when I did the first mold of a mold and I showed the porcelain, the man who had made the original mold just started to weep, because these are people who are not really recognized. So this level of factory worker felt and should feel elevated by that work. This is at the RISD Museum, and the first time I had this piece out, and they had a cup there that has that brick pattern, and the piece I made at top is somewhat an homage to that.
And that's the work that we were able to acquire for the museum in 2018, as Martha mentioned. And because it had this direct connection, it was obviously a wonderful example to start to build our collection of your work, Arlene. And here it is upstairs in the gallery. And this was really, for me then, evocative because, you talk about the molds of the molds and, unlimited multiples and the attention then to the painting and the surface decoration, but then to be able to take from our own collection, like you did, other multiples, so multiple terrains, as you see, sort of flanking Arlene's work on either side, right, really sort of started to drive that point home.
Yeah, so that my mold form, my casserole form, would have been, when it was in plaster in the factory, would have been used to make the bottom of those pieces, those terrains that are there. So the reuniting of these things is really amazing. So this is more of that story where I'm, doing that same thing. And then I worked with some more figurative things. And here's the Butker on the right, really in the factory. That picture was taken in the factory, but this is a portion of the mold, the positive part of the mold that was used to make these bears.
And we touched on it just a little bit, but maybe while we have this slide up to ask, so we talked about how it was a struggle for the Germans at the time to figure out the recipe for the white hard porcelain, which was such a luxury product. It was called white gold. And that the Butker porcelain that we see here, this kind of red stoneware, was a kind of byproduct of that. And it was interesting to me that you went that far sort of back into the history. Was that something that you were learning about while you were at Meissen?
Well, I already knew that I knew the history of porcelain, so I knew the brown stuff came first before they were able to figure out the white stuff. That it was now it's very rare to find it. And in fact, they, at the manufactory, they have a separate small facility only to produce that. And they had stopped doing it because that's not what people know about or care about. They stopped promoting it. Nobody really, unless you're a geek, you're not, that's not being asked for. So I spent quite a lot of time getting to know the people who ran those kilns and would possibly help me make it. So I was actually very heavily involved in getting them to make these few pieces that I was able to make, because I think it's a wonderful material. It's so dense. Porcelain is really then becomes a stone again once it's fired so high and so long. So for those of you who don't know, it's thousands and thousands of degrees. It takes pretty much a week to fire it up and cool it out. And so it's a big production, but the density of it and the sheen, like the one in the gallery, is totally unglazed. Like there's nothing on it, and it's gorgeous. This is just my workstation with some of all these salts. Basically, they're glazes or all these salts. I didn't know, what was going on, but I dabbled heavily, and was able to come up with things like this that were mysterious to the people working because they were doing very strict and straight stuff. And I was doing things like taking handfuls of the actual minerals and putting it on raw, because I knew that they're firing so long and so high that in the end, they would melt. I mean, the kiln master finally, cut me down a little bit, but because the powders were flying all over the kiln. But it was really exciting. This piece is here, but it was really wonderful to work with that. They have amazing kilns there. That again, very, very knowledgeable people who are and there it is.
There it is.
This series that I worked on that has all of the little forms there are throwaways. So at night I would go to people's work tables, and I'd pull things out of the garbage, and because they're all throwaways, but sprues or things like that from the means of production. So it was all part of that same thing. Like what is being thrown out became much more interesting to me. And also my hope was really to make it interesting to everybody. Like what you're doing is actually amazing. This sprue might seem like nothing, but it's really special. It's a special form. And I would imagine that these things were I call them sculpture gardens, and that they were really what I was making was gigantic sculptures. So I actually did make large sculptures, but it took a long time.
And here's some, I love this photo of you at work.
Yeah, so I was, a lot. You can draw in pencil on porcelain. When it fires out, the pencil goes away. So I could just sketch things out that were a riff. And this form, which is a kind of bowl, was actually the mold for the lid of the tureen. Mm-hmm.
So now we're getting into sort of how you're thinking about these objects in space.
Well, I'm thinking about, so I think the way I think about it is that there's the material and how the forms are made, but then there is the relationship to institutions and the public. How are things presented? And so while I was still at the factory, the person who invited me asked me to do a show at his Berlin gallery. And I decided as part of it to only use the things from the factory, all of the furniture from the factory, which took some convincing to get it out because, most of it was there from the 18th or 19th century, and they were embarrassed about it, and I was trying to tell them. And then I think in this one you can see I'm actually foregrounding those objects. I'm not just putting things on them, I'm actually showing them as things. Because this is what I felt, this is why people aren't looking at this stuff. Like, these are actually artists who make amazing things, made amazing things, and they are marginalized institutionally, or people don't get close enough to them in order to see it, react to that, feel it. And so, that's been my point of view.
I mean, also marginalized as the decorative arts in general, which I know is something, that was also the reason why, when we were thinking about where it made sense to do this installation, it was actually very important to take it completely out of the context of the 18th century, but also to take it out of, put it in galleries where, basically, we've added extra sort of signage because people don't expect the, Arlene Shechet / porcelain installation to be literally off of our expressionism and interwar German, primarily painting and sculpture galleries.
Yeah, to give it equal footing, and I have a lot of theories related to, this. Sometimes this was seen as women's work, and porcelain having even though it was men who made most of it, feminine vocabulary around it. And the whole term decorative art is a term that I feel I can embrace totally, like decorative art. I love it, but I do think from a historical or institutional point of view, it is problematic.
And one of the great things about that with the Busch-Reisinger Museum is actually the decorative arts, as such, have always been integrated into the museum's collection. We're likely best known for our Bauhaus collections, but also dating back to the origins of the collection. A lot of this work was always shown in combination. So it's kind of a great legacy.
Yeah. No, Harvard has really been at the forefront of that. This is at the RISD Museum, where they had an amazing paneled porcelain room that they were in the process of thinking about dismantling, even though Abby Aldrich Rockefeller had given all this amazing stuff and all the paneling was beautiful, but nobody had touched it in 30 years and they were only using it for receptions.
And we should say this was your first, beyond the Berlin exhibition that we showed, exhibition where you really worked with a museum collection. And actually, I got that little pamphlet in the mail.
Oh.
It was at 2015 or something. And that was actually, no, even before that.
It was before then.
Before that. And I thought, this is interesting, knowing I had this porcelain collection.
Yeah. So I started, that's when I started to play. They're a collection. In the process of doing this exhibition, I discovered they had 30% more porcelain than they knew they had.
We actually discovered we had a lot more. I'm looking at Jess, our curatorial assistant for the project. We discovered we had a lot more porcelain in our collection too, because once we actually had a curatorial fellow working on it and starting to sort of dig in, that things were actually not recorded in the same way, which also shows because our collection came in the 50s and 60s, and most of it had never been shown. Yeah. So what doesn't get shown doesn't necessarily get the same kind of attention.
Yeah, and I'll say something else here. There was also a absolute prescription against showing dinnerware. If anything was shown, it would only be figures. So, but they had all this beautiful dinnerware, and I felt, again, like, why can't we see that as amazing? Like, to me, I just put that saucer up there above those soldiers who are about to try to break through, and or miners, I guess. I was just like, this is as good as an Agnes Martin painting. This thing is amazing, and it just has to be shown and dealt with and touched and thought about in a different way. So I insisted when I was at the factory, most of the things I made had some part of the dinnerware, because also in the factory, the dinnerware was separated from the sculpture, and they were shocked that I, as a sculptor, would want to use the dinnerware forms. And maybe people disagree with me, but I think a teacup is as good as any fantastic sculpture if it's presented correctly. So
now we're here.
We're here. Thank goodness we got here. So this wonderful gallery that I was presented with is in part wonderful because it's glass and it is permeable to the outside, and the outside is this Le Corbusier building that I love. So these cuts in the wall are partially my homage to that building. So they actually follow that shape of those cuts of those cubbies, and we were able to figure out that, Lynette and the team have been amazing, saying, yes, okay, you can cut into the wall, and yes, we'll make these things, and yes, we'll light them, and it's just one step after.
So glad we lit them.
I'm so glad we lit them. Yeah, I was saying, you don't have to lit them, but one step at a time. I knew you would do the right thing. So here we are in the pregame, setting things up, and here again, this is what my reference is. And not only am I referencing these repeated box forms in the building, I am also using concrete. That was why I chose to use the concrete as pedestal and means of presentation.
And I should say, if you didn't pay attention to the pedestals when you were in the installation, go back up and pay attention to the pedestals, because it actually really was transformative. And when you first approached me and said, actually, I think they all need to be made of concrete.
Cast concrete.
Cast concrete. And it was absolutely right. So.
There's a lot of discussion about that. So cast concrete is another thing that one makes by pouring. So there's the methodology overlaps beautifully with the casting of porcelain. And it shows in the way the material is, fluid but still. Here we are at the Frick, where I was the first contemporary artist to do an installation and tried to figure out how to show their collection of Henry Arnhold's vast holdings. And then this is back, these are plates. This is my various things I've done with plates. So this is back at the RISD Museum, and in this, you can see I use the display, half of the wall it was opposite side, so the whole thing was as if I was envisioning this whole huge gallery as if it was a mold coming apart. And so those are in the negative. Can you see the shelf underneath I made in the negative, and these are in the positive.
Whoop. And that's ours.
Yeah, and so in this, doing this installation, the gift of this glass room was also a challenge in terms of how to display things, because there weren't walls we could attach to, but also that we wanted to figure out how to address the passers-by from outside and not just from inside. And we are very happy to know that there is lots of nose prints and finger marks on the windows. I tried to
take a picture for Arlene of all of the nose and fingerprints on the glass outside the building, because I said, see, it's working. And even when you were installing and working with the team, we get a lot of dog walkers, and a lot of people coming by that way or down the ramp from the Carpenter Center. And, I said, wow, it's already working, and we're not even finished yet.
So in devising this armature, the idea was that we had to come up with a method 2 years ago to do this, again, during the pandemic. But one of the things that I've learned about installing is the magic always happens at the last minute. You can plan something, but it's not really, it's going to be good, but it always has to have some other tweaks at the last minute in order to be great. And so I designed this whole armature so that all of these things can move and change, so that instead of it holding still, they could rotate in various ways and face different directions. Because again, I'm interested in the backs as well, and I want people to feel how the thing is alive, not just dead.
And it really was, as you started turning and tweaking the plates, the whole constellation, really, literally, I think there were some gasps from the team sort of as it started, because it was like, oh, actually, we're moving away again from that sort of flat, approach to, oh, this is a plate and this is a cup. It was literally became a sculpture.
Yeah, yeah, and again, privileging the backs, the side, you know, not getting hung up like this is what you must look at, but all of it is interesting. And this is from the ICA, my catalog. This is the room that we designed for the within my ICA show. There was a porcelain room, and they were so generous as to make this crazy room,
which was amazing.
It was pretty good. Yeah, inside my, 20-year survey was this nugget of surprise, and with, I guess humor is something that I find essential in whatever I am doing, and is a language that reaches people, and a way to make things feel like they're alive. So I always use that. Now here, this is a good example. So this is the monkey band that, which is a complicated thing that if you want to talk about it, Lynette, you can.
We don't have one.
We don't have to
talk
talk about it. But it's this prized 18th century thing of many figures, making music together. But this is how it was displayed at the RISD Museum originally, and then I made a whole crazy thing with breaking it out so that they could actually have a party. This is at the Frick, where I was interested in placing things, like at Harvard, where it's in the window and it's high up. It's everything. I think we think if it's not at eye level, and because we're trained to just look at paintings, if it's not at eye level at 54 inches, maybe we're not.
Oh, 61.
Oh, 61, yeah, whatever. That it's not happening. And so I obviously don't believe that. So I think the way we stretch our bodies to look at things up and down is important, and that there's a lot of delight in discovery, which is an 18th century Rococo idea to begin with. Delight in discovery was one of the things that people would say they wanted, and I think we still want that.
And watching visitors interact with your installation, it really is, sort of crouching down, or we had a whole discussion before the conversation tonight about the slipper, which we do have a slide of, but it tunes you in, and often, literally makes you laugh out loud.
Yeah, and reflection also being an idea about mold. But at the Frick, I hung things. They had these cases that I called IBM cases, and yet the museum is a beautiful house museum. So I said, no, we got to change this thing. I think when they asked me to do this project, they thought I was going to just pick out some of Henry's porcelain and put it in those cases. That is exactly what they thought I was going to do. And
that's what we thought. No, I'm just kidding.
When I refused to do that, I said, you have a house museum, you need brocade, you need furniture, you need to show things. So the porcelain room becomes the part of the house.
And that's what was so nice as you were choosing these slides too, to point to the kind of site specificity of your installation practice. So it was, it really, I mean, the Le Corbusier building, the fact that it was our light-filled Renzo Piano gallery, these mattered to the way that you thought about our installation.
Yeah. There's another one of the sculpture gardens, the Glaze. Outdoor, I got the Frick to let me put some things outside in their garden.
And that was, I remember you saying, the connection to nature, the connection to being, to having the inside and the outside really come together in the gallery. And something you mentioned yesterday was the significance of permeability.
Yeah.
And I thought that actually was something that resonated for me also in your own work in interesting ways.
Permeability. Yeah, how do you see that?
Well, I think also in terms of how we've talked about the process,
right.
and if we think about even the sculptural body or the, maybe it's not permeability as much as malleability.
Yeah. Well, that overlaps. Yeah. Yeah, and also that in doing it, I realized that spot in the museum is also a place where one would enjoy really sitting. So we made a bench to go as part of the installation. And we've noted how successful it is.
Yes.
Yeah. This is while I was in the factory. This was taken. So this is called Gangster Girl on the Block. So, playing with a kind of hip hop culture in this, while I was in Germany, and this very, very different mindset, was really fun. But you can see I was using all these textile patterns from the 18th century. There was only one person in the factory who knew how to paint those. I did not paint those with the single brush, but I sat there with her. I drew them out and she painted it. There's no way I could do that. But the hybridity of what was happening there, of bringing in all kinds of patterns in one small figure, was something that was interesting to me.
And could you actually talk a little bit about these blocks?
Oh yeah,
because
on
they
the block.
they also figure in the installation, and it's actually a question I've already had many times in going through the installation.
So these blocks, so Gangster Girl on the Block, but these blocks, we should have put it again at the end. I had it in the factory. So during, it's all right. After being there for about a year and digging into every corner of the factory, I opened some door and I realized, wow, I've never been in here. And there was just shelves and shelves of blocks like that. And turns out, so ceramics, not just porcelain, but all ceramics is an amazing recyclable material, the original recyclable material. And so when something is made and not fired, water can be added and can be slaked down and something else could be made from it. So those things were, this is the byproduct of those things being slaked down and then put through an extruder that had this form, and then they would let them dry and fire them. And this is, and then you grind these things up to be used as aggregate within the porcelain body, so that the porcelain would shrink or crack a little bit less, because the shrinkage of this porcelain is 18%.
Oh.
so everything that one makes has shrunken down. I mean, it's heart-stopping. You know, the ceramics that I work with now is 10%, but the 18% is just like it's transformed into something else. But because it has this aggregate, it probably is 18% and not 19 or 20%.
And so the sort of holes in these blocks are just there to help it dry faster.
Dry faster and fire easier. Not explode. If it was solid, it would explode under the heat. Yeah. But I love those things because there it is, the modernist grid, you know, and yet industrial and bricks. I have a long history of working with bricks, so it was just perfect. So being able to juxtapose these amazing figures and with things that I made has been just delightful and wonderful, you know, to put it all together. Yeah. Sexy baby eyes over there.
A fan favorite.
That because I was just joking around when I made that, and there was one woman at the factory who would always like paint these really come hither eyes. I was like, what is going on with these? And so I painted one eye, and I was like, can you get in there and paint
so
the
you
other?
did paint
I painted one eye, and she doctored mine.
I see.
I could never do it as well.
This is one of my favorite moments.
Well, there is a slipper. And that is actually those bricks. That's the same thing. That's those bricks. But then when I got to be friends with the guy with the extruder, I was like, well, do you really have to cut them all like that? Can we cut some, can we not cut some? Can you let me cut some? So that's that.
I mean, I love this story, Arlene, because so much of it literally is about your building relationships with the workers at the factory. And, you call, the works like casserole or a celebration of the worker, but actually the way you describe them and your collaborations with them, even though, many of them did not speak any English.
None.
And you didn't really
I did not speak
German. So what was it?
They spoke Russian.
The language of
by the
porcelain?
way.
I mean, how did you actually communicate?
Well, what I realized, at the end of some days, I would realize, I haven't really talked to anybody. I mean, we'd say "tschüss" at the end, but I think the language of making is universal. So we could communicate through making or painting or, laugh at one another's things. And there was also a lot of sugar passed around. So they had a lot of
Kaffeekuchen.
A lot of celebrations with cakes. So it was a pretty good environment. And at the beginning of every day, we had the official "Good morning, colleague" handshake, Eastern Germany handshake. Yeah. So it was a not to be missed experience. You're gonna talk.
I'm going to talk about this.
Yeah.
Well, so. I mean, basically, this is the work in the installation that is not made of porcelain, and actually a work that I fell in love with watching Arlene on Instagram Live because it was the lockdown, and you had just opened your show at Pace called Skirts, with really recent sculpture just made in 2020. And I was watching Arlene after not having access to her exhibition for 3 months due to the pandemic. Re-enter her gallery exhibition and see see your work again after, we were all in that phase, kind of wondering
Separated at
what was
birth.
going to happen and where things were going to take us. And I was also new to Instagram. So it was a special time, and watched you talk about this work, which is called Grammar, and really kind of spoke to me in the sense that I actually thought that was the moment where I knew this needed to be a work in the installation. And in some ways, we'd had for many, many years, Renee Sintinis's Daphne bronze was on this kind of center sightline to that gallery. And I sort of already started to imagine what would it be like to have Grammar, this work of this clay body that you've also fired multiple times, that had also this malleability, this relationship to the pores, and to me it is almost like this pulsating organ atop, again, this very strict steel base.
What do we have as
What other ones we have?
Oh yeah, that. Show the next.
Or here.
So that's the underside of the wood, and I think that's what I
was thinking about expressionism and color, symbolism, and studies of color, and as you enter into the gallery, you literally walk by Franz Marc's Grazing Horses 4, which is a testament to really sort of pushing color and color combinations in painting.
Yes.
But you were inspired by a different artist altogether for...
Well, I was inspired for the bottom, but my seamless inspiration comes from all that German expressionist sculpture and those paintings. So that I felt was the body, the heaviness of it, the glaze, all of those things I really felt spoke to the gallery before. So again, like Corbusier's over there, and those great collection of German paintings is on the other side. So being sandwiched in that is just divine. And the bottom, this wood form that this thing is birthing, or the other way around, comes from Thomas Cole's 19th century color wheel. So that is, if you go underneath and look at it, and now after yesterday, I had a memory of how in that video, I said something about delight and discovery. Because I'm hiding that color wheel underneath. And so I think that
something you said resonated with me.
I remember that because
we need this at the Harvard Art Museums.
And grammar, I had been reading something of Rosalind Krauss, and now I can't remember what it was, but in there was the word grammar, and I was like, that's that primary idea of what everything comes from and floods out to be. There is an essentialism in that. So,
and the elemental in the color wheel, and then as you literally take it up the sides, and it becomes this kind of rising spectrum of color. And what I loved also is that in the exhibition skirts, thinking about this also as a skirt-like form, sort of feminine form, and we had our Pechstein window, which we integrated into the installation. And that I think you learned to embrace.
Yes.
But that, again, was also this female figure in a completely different tradition of decorative arts making. Well, I think it's, for me, it really is the fulcrum of this gallery, and has been great to see actually people, there isn't anyone who comes into the gallery who doesn't at some point walk all the way around Grammar.
Yeah, we were very careful to place it so that it could be walked all the way around. That's
Just to wonder what it probably looks like out there right now.
No, there we are.
And very happy.
Very pleased with ourselves during the installation.
So I would actually love in the time that remains to open it up for questions, comments for Arlene about anything. Philip? Oh, here's a microphone, Philip, just a sec.
Okay.
I'm discovering your work through, this show. And did you work a lot with porcelain and ceramic before?
No, I never.
And are you continuing afterwards?
I did not. I had never worked with porcelain, and I'm not working. I'm spoiled. I'm working with. Actually, I guess I'm making some drawings that are using porcelain slabs, but not in a sculptural form. So after working at the factory, but I had been working with ceramics, and I'm still using ceramics, but not as my only material.
That's why Grammar is a great example,
Yeah, it
actually,
is.
because it's integrating so many different materials that that you turn to really
Yeah.
repeatedly.
Yeah. There's always an equation of some wood, some steel, sometimes more, some clay.
You would go back to Meissen one day and carry on?
He's asking if
Oh, would I go
to
back?
Meissen.
You dream with it at night?
It was more PTSD. So more, not that I didn't love it, but the thing was, I didn't know anybody in that town. I lived a very solitary life there, and I literally would walk home. So I worked all the time. I worked because I didn't have anything else to do. So I worked 16 hours a day, very, very regularly. And everybody would leave the factory at 3, and I would be alone in the factory. And I taught myself not to be terrified. So I managed to do it, but and then walk home by myself through this whole town. So I don't think I would be as extreme. I was just trying to learn everything I could and do everything that was possible. And so when it was very hard for me to stop, but I would be interested possibly to go to a different factory, and see and compare methodologies, and see if they would give me access. But a lot of the other porcelain factories want me to do, I have been invited to places, but they want me to do something that is a multiple that they can sell, and I could stay home and make my own work, and so I don't want to do that. Well, maybe we.
Well, it explains
answered.
why there's so much work from
Yes.
that period in porcelain, because
Yeah, it's true. I was just shocked, actually, at how much.
How long did you stay actually?
Just about 2 years. I commuted. I did come back. I would have gone truly out of my mind, and people visited me. But when they visited me, except for my husband, they were never allowed into the factory. Even the curators who visited that I knew from Dresden. It was really, so people were calling me up all the time, like, oh, good, you're there, can I get in?
me in.
And I couldn't.
That's why I took the tourist tour.
Yeah. I know, we'll have to go back. I think they would let me go in now, because I've seen anything. And I love, there's been over the years, will that factory continue? I certainly hope that it will, because, and I was actually even asked by the state, people from the state, and I was just like, yeah, there are people there who know things that nobody else knows. You have to keep it going, because it's continuous production since 1710, so it just doesn't exist.
And something that you've pointed out before, that it's really multi-generational workers there, so who are from Meissen, their parents and their grandparents. There is a knowledge. You mentioned the woman who was the only one who could knew how to still paint some of those designs.
Yeah. There's complications. There are socio-political complications to having a factory town, which is essentially what it is, because people don't have other means of employment. And then they're very intensely trained to do this thing, so what else can they do and where else can they go? So I spent a lot of time trying to get people to learn to speak English. Because really that was their ticket. That was their ticket, out into some other place, if they wanted to be. But there's a lot of resistance. Okay, I think.
Questions? Oh, we have one up there, Francesca.
Hi, thank you so much. This was fascinating. And I love what you've done. I was curious about the act of curating, of mixing your own work with the collections, and whether this is something that, what you've learned from that, what we may have learned from that, and what, how you made some of the decisions that you did, whether it's, stacking the little, placing the little slipper there and that figure. Is it just, I don't know, kind of your sense of whimsy and humor? But then there's also the whole very sculptural, complex installation of the plates that required a lot of assistance, I know, from our exhibitions department. And what role did you have in also the design of that? And I guess just how do you navigate all of those choices with a team of other people too?
Yeah.
And does that translate into other projects that you work on?
Yeah. Well, number one, I'm a sculptor. So I'm dealing with space and questions of space and placement all of the time in my work. So none of it is really that foreign to me. It's what I love to do, play in different spaces. And then I think I also feel that there's a special privilege one gets as an artist. To break out of an art historical format that maybe you're not. I've worked with.
I definitely would have been allowed to build this plate constellation. No.
Yeah. So I feel like I get to play in this field. I just did a show at the Drawing Center, so that was just somebody's drawing collection, and I got to play with those things too. And so it wasn't spatial in the three-dimensional sense as much, although I did bring in 3 dimensions, but I just feel like it's my natural, it's what I do. It's what I do best. I toyed with being an architect. I think there's architecture within sculpture and sculpture within architecture. So, it's all the same thing. My work, when I was starting to make ceramics, I was building, I built bases or pedestals for those pieces, and people were constantly talking about that. Oh, you're building it. And for me, that just, I couldn't understand why that was special. It seemed natural that one would need to think about the whole. And in fact, I think the whole incorporates the gallery, incorporates that museum, the space, and then maybe outside, and then maybe inside, and then maybe audience. So I feel we break things down in our lives in ways that I just have the privilege as an artist working within a museum structure that I don't have to accept. And so it is a delight and a privilege. And I get to work with professionals and amazing historical objects that I don't have access to regularly, that I get to touch with my installation, if not with my hand, but often with my hands.
Well, that was the great moment, actually, after we couldn't actually have you here when you finally were able to come last September, and we had all of the porcelain up in the Art Study Center on the level 4.
Yeah.
And Arlene, you finally start, literally moving things around. We saw some of those images, and I have to say it was a very exciting moment for me, and I think for the whole team, because we were like, oh, now it's really happening,
Yeah, it can't really happen until you're in the space with things. But I love doing installation, and I think all of my shows are done with that same consciousness when it's my own work as well.
Hello, I also have another question, and I want to first say thank you, and I absolutely adore your piece and your art concept. And I have a question, how do you choose the material for the installation or for display your pieces? Because I know you use a lot of different materials like concrete or wood. How do you understand the relationship between those material and ceramics or porcelain?
You mean when I'm installing in an institution, or when I'm just making my own sculpture?
Or even in the show, how do you choose the material? Why you put your porcelain works on the concrete, poured concrete, or
Well, the poured concrete came from trying to reference the building, the Le Corbusier building. That was a concrete building, a cast concrete building, which is a very sort of a radical building, well-known icon of modern architecture. So I was wanting to honor that, and so that's my nod to that. So there's usually, I privilege just making the decision without overthinking it. And that is something that is also, when one is making art, there's a decision a minute. So I'm a good decision maker.
I can attest to that. Well, thank you so much, Arlene. This was wonderful.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming tonight. And I just wanted to remind you that actually Arlene's installation and also all of our modern and contemporary galleries on level 1 are open until 9 o'clock. So if you'd like to go back up and take another close look or take a look at our collections, now is your chance. And I do want to put in a plug for our Busch-Reisinger Museum Instagram, where we have a lot of conversations about rethinking our historic collections and around art and identity. And you can find us at busch_hall. So follow us. Arlene follows us very actively. So thank you for that. And yeah, thank you all for coming, and see you at our next event. Check out the calendar for what's coming up next at the Harvard Art Museums.